Yeah, good. Howard?
Okay, thank you so much, Kicken. Thank you all for showing up for this. Rob, for asking me a question earlier that took my mind off of what I'm supposed to be doing here because I truly have no idea. This is one of the rare times that I really haven't put an extraordinary amount of time in preparation, and I'm a believer in preparation. I have some early material that was published in Akron in 1940, an AA speaker's manual that specifically says and advocates preparation with written notes, that your audience deserves that much respect. So I try as much as possible to do that, and didn't get nearly as far as I would like this time. But let me just start, please, with a moment to kind of get settled. I'd like to go through the set aside prayer. Dear God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, my disease, the big book, and the 12 steps, everything I think I know about the program, the fellowship, all spiritual terms, and especially about you, God, so I may have an open mind and a new experience. Please help me see the truth. Amen. I've been asked to talk about the third step, and I think it probably would benefit this presentation if I gave you some idea of what my relationship was like with God before I got here. Because we're being asked, I mean, in the third step, in Bill's story, he says that he's being asked in the second step to have blind faith in a strange proposition. And I apply that to the second and the third step. You are asking me to have a faith, which I don't have. Faith means knowledge, courage, knowledge, experience, surety. I don't have any of that. So when you tell me I have to have that right away, I separate. I'm not in that camp. And I'll tell you why. And that's why the background, I think, is so important. I should tell you up front, those of you who know me, I suffer from a handicap. I'm Jewish, which means I wake up every morning wondering what it is I've done wrong already and spend the rest of the day apologizing for things I never did. I was raised in a semi-Orthodox Jewish home in New York, which meant we followed customs, observed traditions, holidays. We kept a kosher home. We ate only kosher foods. And in case you're not familiar with that particular form of dietary dictatorship, let me tell you a little bit about a kosher home. There are certain foods, meat and dairy in particular, that were never allowed to be combined. They had to be eaten separately, stored separately, prepared separately. For some, I don't know, strange reason, the world would spin off its axis if those two ever touched, but they were never allowed to touch meat and dairy. Also, there was pork products, which you never, under any circumstances, were allowed to eat. So as a kid, I thought, if I had a bacon cheeseburger like everybody else around me, I could get struck by lightning. That was a perfect storm of dietary sin, and it made absolutely no sense whatsoever. So at an early age, I started to develop a lot of feelings of conflict and confusion regarding religion and God, because, well, there's a problem in itself. I thought they were one and the same, and they are not. I wish that someone prior to 2006 had explained to me the difference between religion and spirituality, but I didn't know that. When I came in here, I did not know that. So being raised in that environment, I had to go to Hebrew school for a religious training every day after regular school from 3:30 to 5:30 every day, from the ages of 9 to 14, while everybody else was out playing, developing social skills. I had to be in Hebrew school, and I hated it, and I deeply resented my parents for sending me there. Because you see, Hebrew school is all about cramming as much dogma as possible into my little mush brain, telling me what to believe and why to believe, and telling me these quaint little fables and tales, and expecting me to just blindly accept their conclusions because, well, they're in charge. And that's the way they say it is. So that's the way it has to be. And that never sat right with me. So I started to have a lot of problems with authority figures. Now, I'll give you an example. In Hebrew school, we were being told about how Moses led the Jews out of bondage in Egypt by God separating the Red Sea. And they walked through the seabed, assumably they came to Florida with that, because that's where all the Jews seem to have wound up, is in Florida. So he gave us a path to get here. And then he drowned the Egyptians who passed behind us. But the point was, the moral of the story was to know that we were the chosen people, that God wanted us to survive and to thrive. So he saved the Jewish race by letting them walk through the Red Sea to freedom. And up goes my little 10-year-old hand. And I said, okay, what about the Holocaust? How does that fit into this God's will kind of stuff? And the answer I got was, well, we'll never really know what God's will is. And I thought, well, you know exactly what it was a minute ago in that other story. And now you want me to blindly accept your conclusion here because it just suits what you're trying to say. And I couldn't, it just never sat well. And I had the same problem in grade school. Most of you look like you could probably remember this, but I grew up in the 50s, late 60s, early 60s, in the New York City school system. Amazing, I can still read, but I got through the New York City school system, and we, at the time, this was a Cold War period where we were told that at any moment, Russia, the Soviet Union, could drop an atomic bomb on us. And so in school, we had shelter drills. And as I look, I see a few of you nodding, so you know what a shelter drill is. But for those of you who don't, we were told in school that if there was a nuclear attack during school hours, we were to hide under our wooden desks. Now, let me just phrase this another way. We were told that we could survive an atomic fireball, a nuclear holocaust, by seeking refuge under kindling. I remember huddling under that desk thinking, I'm about as safe as a rump roast in an oven down here. Who the hell do they think they're kidding? So I'm having a lot of problems with authority figures and God's will. And when I'm 14 years old, my mom passed away after a lengthy bout with cancer. And so now I can't do what other kids do. I can't go where they go. I can't eat what they eat. And now I don't even have a mom. So my feelings of inadequacy were just out of control. But the main point I want to make here is what was told to me about my mom's passing. My father explained that God took her because he needed her very much. Let me explain that again, say that again. God took my mother away from her 9-year-old son, I had a brother, and me, I was 14, because he needed her very much. And I thought, how could that son of a bitch need her more than me or my brother? How could that possibly be right? So I had a chip on my shoulder about God for a long time. And it followed me into here. See, I've suffered from a spiritual malady for as long as I could remember. I never felt comfortable in my environment or my own skin. I was always acting as if and feeling wrong. And when I say wrong, I don't mean like, oh, I'm sorry, I stepped on your toes wrong. Wrong being like, I'm on the wrong planet. I shouldn't, how do these people communicate? I just could not feel like I fit in anywhere until I got that right combination of chemicals. and of alcohol and a few other things, and things instantly changed for me. I felt part of life. I fit in. I could be outgoing. I could tell jokes. I could do all of those things. And I don't want to go through a lengthy war story here because it's not relevant, but for 10 years, I took every kind of drug and alcohol that you can possibly imagine daily just to function. And February 1983, I weighed about 80 pounds. My skin was gray and translucent. My arms looked like a bad road in the Bronx. And I was having seizures on a regular basis because of the combination of chemicals I was taking. And I was spitting blood regularly. And I suddenly had a moment of clarity where I asked my dad for help. And he brought me to a new doctor who had me admitted to a program, a rehab in Connecticut. And that rehab took me to you and the rooms of AA. And nothing in my life has been the same since. But I've got to tell you, I am not one of those people who came in here and was those happy, shiny people who they're so glad that we have this society and we can come and we can not drink together, and they have coffee and donuts and they have these stale cookies, but at least it's something. And you know what? We're going bowling on Thursday. Isn't that great? I can't stand bowling. I never did go bowling, but these idiots went, so I went along with it just to belong. But at the first meeting I went to, right away, I had problems. First of all, you hugged me. I walked into the room and these strangers hugged me. And that already put me off. Then they started into this kind of ritualistic chant about serenity that began with the word God. And right away, I was convinced, yeah, I knew that's what this was. This was a cult. They were indoctrinating me into it. The next thing they're going to do is ask for my money. And you know what they did next? They passed the basket. And I remember passing the basket in synagogue. And in synagogue, that basket kept going around and around until they had enough money in it to fund whatever project they wanted to fund. So that could go on for hours. A rabbi could blabber on for hours, and it was just out of hand. And I thought, oh, is that what's going to happen here? Half of the people here are in treatment. They ain't got no money. And what you do get in the basket are coins. I hope you don't have plans for a lot of money because you're not going to get any. I don't care how long this thing goes around the room. But in any case, started to talk to me about God. And I felt like when I later read Bill's story, I felt like Bill and Ebby at that kitchen table where Ebby is trying to talk to Bill about God. And Ebby and Bill, all Bill could hear is religion, religion, religion. And my counselor at this rehab said, look, why don't you tonight, as an assignment, go write down on a pad the qualities you would like your higher power to have, whatever that is. Imagine there was such a thing. Okay, I'm not asking you to believe that. I'm asking you to just write down the qualities you would like your higher power to have. And I went and did that. And when I came back the next day, here, Bubba, let me show you my list. And he said, I'm not the least bit concerned with what you have written down. The fact that you have something written down means you can now begin to make an approach to that power. And I felt like I've been tricked, but I got the point a little bit. And in order for me to address the third step, I need to go back and talk about the first and the second. The first step for me was answered in the doctor's opinion, that my question of why can't I drink like anyone else was clearly explained. And it was a relief for me to know that I wasn't bad, I wasn't evil, I wasn't immoral, I wasn't weak. I had an actual malady, a 3-part malady, this allergy-like reaction to the ingestion of these chemicals. And more than that, this obsession, when I am not under the influence of these chemicals, when I have a period of time where I'm not drinking and drugging, my mind begins to play tricks on me. And all it does is remind me of the things that alcohol did for me and none of the things that it did to me. And I begin to remember how I felt restless and irritable and discontented. My spiritual malady was coming to the surface. And I eventually was able to convince myself that in order to satisfy that, I needed one. Just give me one and that'll be enough. And I took the one drink and that triggered the allergy and I was off to the races. I've been in AA since 1983. I've celebrated 10-year anniversaries 3 times. I've made every mistake one could possibly make in recovery. And when I came in for the first time, someone told me, don't drink, go to meetings, and that's all you have to do. Nobody talked about the steps. Nobody talked about the steps. But in my mind, I'm working a hell of a program. I'm sharing crazy at a meeting. I'm doing what everybody else seems to be doing. But in my 7th year, my then wife got very sick. And I stopped going to, I was going to 5 to 7 meetings a week, went down to 0 overnight. I had to work a 6-day-a-week job, take care of a young child and a sick spouse. And 25 years or so went by. She eventually passed away from this malady. But everything changed for me in that 7th year, and I stopped going to meetings. So the one thing I was doing, the way that I was connecting, disappeared. And I decided to, and I managed to somehow stay sober another 3 years. And then after my 10th anniversary, I decided to celebrate by trying a few of my wife's pain pills that I had never taken before. And that just set off the allergic reaction and I was off again. But I want to really get to what we're asked to address here, which is the 3rd step. When I came back the last time, January 2006, and I celebrate my clean date as May 2nd, 2006, because between January and May, I was lost. I was a walking time bomb. I was just convinced that AA was, your solution was inaccessible to me. Some people got it, some didn't. I'm one of those who don't. And I was convinced that there was nothing you could possibly offer me. But the 3rd step, I was told, was about making a decision to turn something over. And I thought, well, they tell me to pray every night, every morning. So every morning I turn my will over. What does that look like? Well, I said, God, I'm giving you my will. And here's the list of things I need you to do today. You know, there was always a list attached here. If I'm giving you my will, I've got to be giving you the assignments that need the will to be exercised. And at the end of the day, I had my list and I went back to God and I saw nothing's happened. Everything on the list is still there. But I'll give you a chance tomorrow. We'll try it again tomorrow. And for a long time, that was my relationship with God. I had a very dysfunctional relationship because I thought he was my errand boy. But when I got to working the 3rd step with this group, I realized I had it all wrong, that I wasn't turning anything over in the 3rd step. All I was doing in that 3rd step was making a decision to do something, just making that decision. I wasn't, I didn't, the 2nd step in Shelley says came to believe. It didn't say came to have faith, came to know. So by the 3rd step, all I'm saying is I'm deciding to pursue that power. If in the 1st step I learned I can't fix me, that a sick mind cannot heal a sick mind. But there was good news because in the 2nd step, I was told there is a power that can do for me what I couldn't do for myself. So in the 3rd step, I made a decision to pursue that power. And that's all I did in the 3rd step. If I just said, if I sit here and tell you I'm going to New York, I've decided I'm going to New York. You know what? I'm going to New York. Hey, did I tell you I'm going to New York? If all I do is sit here and tell you I'm going to New York, I've done nothing. I'm telling you, I know most people here know about the 3 frogs on a log story, but there are 3 frogs sitting on a log, 2 decide to jump off. How many are left? 3, because the 2 just decided to jump off. They didn't actually do anything. And so I realized in order to make this work in the 3rd step, I had to turn something over. What? Well, the step says to turn over my will in my life. And I recognize that the results of this step, of step 3, is going to be based on the decision itself, but the actions are going to prove the result of that decision. There's no action in that 3rd step. There's just a commitment to doing something. I was talking to Kathy, my beautiful wife, who's here today somewhere. I love you, sweetheart. We were talking the other day, and she said something that just struck me so hard, that the 3rd step is like signing a contract with this power. And the turn of each page after that 3rd step prayer was like initialing passages in a legal contract. You know, when you're signing a legal contract, on each paragraph, you have to read an initial that you signed it. Well, that's what the 3rd step was like, was making that, assigning that contract. And every step after that, I was initialing it as I went through those things. So I'm being told to do that, but what is my will? I know that the will is supposed to be a collection of my thoughts. Actions, collection of my life actions. So if I'm turning my thoughts and my actions over, what does that look like? Well, if I'm not happy with the actions of my life, if the outcome of my life is not satisfactory, say, for example, I wanted to stop drinking and drugging. Let's just take the obvious, that I have to do more than just say that, because there's a chain of events that leads to that. When I decide to make an action based on one of the manifestations of self that I came up with in my 4th step, and I know I'm jumping ahead, but I realized I was a frightened, irresponsible, inconsiderate, dishonest, selfish, self-seeking, judgmental individual. And when I made a decision based on those self-seeking, self-centered actions, I was in conflict with everybody, everything, spiritually, mentally, physically. And when I collided with those forces with which I was in conflict, and I inevitably did, because you see, the problem with self-will is everyone's got it. And if I try and force my will on you, or in any given situation that's not where it's not welcome, I'm going to get a reaction. When I step on your toes, you're going to retaliate. That's the wording Bill used. You retaliate. And when you retaliate, when you push back and say, no, I'm not going to let you do that, what do? Well, now I retaliate. I get angry. I get fearful. I act in a harmful manner. In other words, I get resentful. And when I'm resentful, history has taught me that I will drink and drug every time, because that's the solution to all of these things. The only way I can feel good about myself is to consume that drug or that alcohol. So if the way that it was explained to me for identifying will with thoughts is like this: I'm not getting much younger, and I'm very conscious of the limited amount of time I may have. And I'm very conscious also of things in my life. And I'd like certain of those things to go to certain people, to certain places. And so I sit down and I make a list of those things, and I go to somebody who I pay to validate that list. And that list becomes my will. And a will legally is defined as a collection of thoughts. So a collection of thoughts regarding my possessions. So if I'm turning my will over, I'm turning over my thinking process. And if I turn over my thinking process, the actions will follow. You see, I can't act my way into good thinking. I know I've heard people say that, but just saying that means you've made a decision to do that, which means it starts up here. Everything starts with a thought. I can't reach over and pick up this pen if my brain doesn't communicate it to my arm, to my hand, to my fingers to pick up the pen. All action is born in thought. If my actions are lousy, my thinking is lousy. So if I want to change the actions of my life, the third step says you've got to pursue this power that has the ability to do that. And in my fourth step, I looked at the things that made me frightened, irresponsible, inconsiderate, and so on. See, I couldn't identify a single emotional disturbance in my life that wasn't caused by the fact that I was angry as hell about something, I was scared to death about something, or I've done something I don't want you to find out about, and I'm filled with guilt and shame. And if those things are the guiding, compelling forces in my life, I have to identify what triggers them. So I start by listing out my angers. And then I list out my fears. And again, this is not a fourth step discussion, so I'm not going to get too deep into that. But by the end of the fourth step, I had this list of characteristics. I was frightened, irresponsible, inconsiderate, dishonest, selfish, self-seeking, judgmental. Those were the expressions of my will that turned into decisions that required me to take action. And those actions were not good when they were based on those thoughts. So what I had to do is, in my sixth step, look at that handful of defects and say, I don't like the outcome of this anymore. I'm no longer willing to pay the price of what happens when I make a decision based on those things. And I don't know why it takes people so long. I was at a meeting the other day where a guy said, I've been working on the sixth step for 2 years. How the hell could you do that? How can you, it's like sitting in a dirty diaper for 2 years. At some point, you're going to get sick and tired of it and have to take it and throw it away. And that's all that we're required to do in the sixth step, is see the effect that these defective thoughts have had on my life and say, I don't want to be that person anymore. And I'm done. Took me 25 minutes, even though the book says take an hour. I had it done in 25 minutes. I knew what I had to do next. And in the seventh step, I was given a formula for how to change those things, for how to change my will so that the actions don't come out to be so costly. So what I did is, when I run into myself, my old self, on a daily basis, in other words, I find myself being frightened or irresponsible, inconsiderate, dishonest, I have to turn to the power at this point who has gotten me to where I am today. See, I didn't get here by myself. That power, I signed a contract with that power, and now I have to do something about it. So what I did in my seventh step is, when I ran into those thoughts, I stopped and asked God to help me be the opposite. Whatever I was doing, if I was being dishonest, if I was being inconsiderate, God, help me be honest, help me be considerate now, not next time. Seventh step requires action now, not next time. I spent my whole life doing that kind of junk. So when I find myself doing that, I ask God to come in, and with his help and my willpower, I act on the asset. I stop acting on the defect. I have in fact turned my thinking and my actions over to the care of God. I put it in his hands. I don't want to be that dishonest, inconsiderate person. Help me to not be that person now. And then I apply all of the self-will I have to go back in and correct that situation and act on my asset. I have, in fact, turned my thinking process and now my actions over to the care of that God. And I really started to feel, for the first time in my seventh step, the effects of that third step. I listed them in the fourth step and I talked about them in the fifth step and I saw the cost of them in the sixth step, but it's still thinking, learning. I actually saw the results of the actions of putting something in God's hands and then helping him execute those things. You see, when I got down on my knees at the end of the day for many years and gave God my will, and here's my list of things I need for you to do, I was asking him to be my errand boy. And I had it all wrong. I am actually the errand boy. That on page 60, I learned that God was my director. He's the principal. Basically, he tells me what to do. I don't tell him what to do. And the third step carries it through the rest of these steps. I have to make amends for the harms that I've done prior to that in my eighth and ninth step when I went and did that. And after the ninth step, I noticed something different, really different. I was not the same person I was before. I had made peace spiritually. I got the pecking order, if you will, in line in that second step. God was in charge, not me. So I got right in the first three steps with God. I got right in 4, 5, 6, and 7 with myself. I got right up here in my mind. And in 8 and 9, I got right with you folks. So as a result of the first 9 steps, I was perhaps for the first time in my life healthy, spiritually, mentally, and physically. And if I was in harmony in those 3 basic dimensions, I was then walking in what Bill describes as the 4th dimension of existence. I have entered the world of the spirit. My life is not mine anymore. I am in this 4th dimension where I function to serve God and the people about me. And in the 10th step, I'm given basically my instructions for how to live on a daily life, because the 10th step is nothing more than taking that 3rd step decision and saying, we're going to work 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 today in all of our affairs. So I take that 3rd step decision every day. I was talking somewhere recently, and we were talking about how many steps there really are. We know there's 12 steps, but we talk all the time about we live in 10, 11, and 12. So we're in essence really saying that we're working a 3-step program. And I don't think that's accurate. I think in all fairness, we are working a 6-step program, because every day, I have to remind myself who's in charge here. I work those first 2 steps every morning. I work that 3rd step every morning. So I work 1, 2, and 3. And the step that gets me through the day basically is 10. It's my daytime walking around step. It's the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th, all rolled into one. And the 11th step, I enhance this 6th sense, vital 6th sense of God consciousness, that I am in the presence of a power that I not only sensed, but sensed becoming part of me. And I connected with that power in the 11th step. And in the 12th step, is really a 3-part step. I recognize the first part of the step is what I've just done. I've had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. But nothing is free in this life. So I'm being handed a bill. I'm being charged with the responsibility in the 2nd step to tell you of my experience and to help you have the same. The 3rd part of the step is the greatest challenge of all, to practice these principles, these steps in all my affairs. And if I could do that, at the end of the day, when I put my head on the pillow, I can look back and say, I am not the same person I was before. I catch myself periodically during the day having these little spiritual experiences where I feel it, I detect it. People call it God moments. I call it just a spiritual experience, and it comes and it goes. But what gets me through life is the basis that I found of a spiritual awakening, where the 10th, 11th, and 12th step keeps me focused in those areas. And let me just wrap up with a couple of things. I believe that everyone here, we are very special people. We've been blessed with a condition, the solution for which stands to make us better people than we ever thought possible. We've been given an opportunity, and it's just that, an opportunity. It is not a guarantee. An opportunity to live 2 lifetimes in one, at least 2. Think about it. That which we had or have. If you read page 52 and that looks like your life, then you still have a spiritual malady. But I don't have that anymore. And I have now been given a way of life that is so far exceeds anything I ever could have wished for in my life. And I want to end really with a story. Besides telling you that we are such special, gifted people, we've been blessed with this disease, and God has given us a way to treat it. But in the story, the young girl with her family visited the great cathedrals of Europe for their vacation. And she was very taken and very moved by the beauty and the splendor of the stained glass windows as she walked by them, bathed in warmth and light. So she asked the tour guide, "Who are those figures in the window?" And he said, "Those are the saints." So when she got back to school and the teacher asked her what she did on her vacation, she said, "I saw the saints." And when the teacher asked her, "Who are the saints?" this little girl, in her magnificent innocence, said, "The saints, they're the ones who let the light in." Now, I believe God got very tired of seeing us die from this disease. So he set in motion a chain of events, what Bill called a chain of cosmic coincidences in the early 30s. And through saints here on earth, through people on earth like Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob and Dr. Jung and Dr. Silkworth and Hank Parkhurst and Fitz Mayo and Ebby Thatcher, and I can go on for hours giving you names, but through those saints, he's let the light in for millions of us, millions of us. Do you know that there are now approximately 650 fellowships around this world using our 12 steps? How many lives have we saved, have been saved as a result of that? And I believe if God worked through people then, he most certainly works through people today. So he put people in my life that showed me the light, that let the light in for me. I stand on the shoulders of some incredible giants who have taught me everything I know. And if I say something that in any way, at any time, passes along the slightest glimmer, the slightest flicker of that light that was given to me, if I pass that along to just one person, then I've done my job here today. I've done what God asked me to do. So until we meet again, may God bless you all. May you find your light. Thank you for having me.